Hi everyone. Now I'm starting up this little mini series, The Road to Power, and the first episode will be not this one, but the one that follows is about measurements. Like when you read how powerful an amp is, what is the wattage rating for the amp, what that really means, and check out that other video for that. So now this is the introduction for that video, and then a couple more to come on discussing what power is and what makes for dynamics, impact, resolution, because right now I feel that compared to 20 years ago when I was a fledgling audiophile, during these past 20 years there was a tremendous shift in perception, in how and what audiophiles think in general, what is the solution, how to get, I would say not just the best, but what is the best or most efficient way to get a system that is good sounding. And nowadays we live in the middle of the loudness wars, which means that everyone is, or not everyone, but the perception is that the louder the better, the more watts the better, and other solutions do not lead to happiness. The only systems that can be considered state of the art, can be considered as excellent music reproduction machines, are the ones that can play at silly loud volumes, and everything else is just forget about it, because it's not even worth a mention. That's technology of a past era. We are much more evolved than that, and we should be moving on. So now I'm here to educate everyone a little bit more on this issue. And that's because I had exposure to some alternatives and I followed up on them, and I can testify that those alternative routes are just as efficient and effective and can bring as much joy and as much musical satisfaction as these mainstream solutions. So the road to power, is there more than one road leading to Rome? That's the old expression that every road leads to Rome, and basically that's true in stereo as well. There are more than just one ways to build a system that leads to high performing system as defined in an objective way, or a fantastic sounding system as defined in a music way. So the market in the online representation of audio technologies is such that if we compare it to a cake, then there's 3 slices of cake that everyone talks about as the most coveted, as the best cake. Everything else is really just second rate or worth a mention in the lower dregs of audio society. And then these 3 big layers are, one of them is the silly expensive amplifiers and solutions. And now I'm just talking about amplifiers because this is just focusing on amps, this mini series. So today we have a cult of these extremely expensive stuff, which are getting more and more expensive year by year, and that's okay. I call these items the fetish or the totem, because that's something that you just put at a very prominent place of your room, and you pray to it like every day, and then when you have people visiting you, they go like, oh my god, I've been reading about this in this and that review, or this and that magazine, and it's just wow. So it's these equipment have their place in our society, in our audio society, and their function is to generate dreams and generate motivating force, and that's perfect. But it doesn't mean that they are the end of the road, and doesn't mean that those equipment are the best sounding. They can do lots of things, and I cannot really put them under the same category, because each equipment has very different sonic characteristic to it. So I cannot just say that all expensive amps sound the same. They sound very different from each other. There are some excellent specimens in this price range, but there are also some that would not stand comparison to $1,000 very good amp. So it's, as I said, it's more like a fetish category, more like a dream zone, and it motivates us, and that's what they are for. And the other big slice of the cake is the huge, enormous power amplifiers. Now this is the fad of 2020. Everyone wants high power. It's gone the era when people thought of 100 watts as high power, and now 100 watts is just, it's kind of like an entry ticket to the cinema, to get the rows in the back somewhere, maybe on the balcony, something like that. And we have this notion because now we have the Class D technology, and with that it's very, very easy and very cheap to get extremely high power ratings out of it, and that has started to cause power inflation. So now people are just focused on cranking out the highest wattage possible, and this is not just a recent trend. This has been a trend forever to get as much power out of your system as possible. And while for solid state technologies this might not be the worst thing, because it's relatively easier and more natural to get more power out of them, but for vacuum tubes, I think this has been the death spell of vacuum tubes. Because when you force a vacuum tube to put out the maximum possible power, you are compromising its operation a lot. And what manufacturers, mostly for the tube amps you can buy in the stores, 95% of them are made in such a way to appease the reviewer's wrath and the buyer's psychological needs to have as much watts as possible to drive their dead speakers, or I wouldn't even say dead speakers, because even low power tube amps can really work miracles even with low efficiency speakers, but they are not made for them at all, and it's not an optimal solution. But when you progress on your audio journey and you have the chance of mating a very high quality tube amp to your speakers, even if they are low efficiency, you will be very much surprised at what you hear, and it will give you a very different view on music, musicality, and how you perceive music. But let's now just return back to the watt issues. Is that right now basically even for tube amplifiers, if it's less than 100 watts, they are not considered as serious amplifiers. And that's really a crying shame, because when you force vacuum tubes to put out the maximum available power, then they will start to sound harsh and lifeless, and they will become a lower power imitation of these high power solid state amps. So it's the sound quality and how you perceive the sound. It's not just like tubes versus solid states. if you force vacuum tubes to behave in a certain way, they will sound exactly like a solid state amplifier. And that's where the audio industry has gone during the past 20-30 years. And I think that's really terrible, because nowadays truly most of the tube amps you can buy are just lower power versions of the solid state amplifiers. But that's not at all what they are supposed to be, and they make a very bad rap for tube amps in general. So that was the market. But when we look at the sound quality, what sound can you expect from equipment? There is a tremendous slice of the cake that doesn't represent the market. It just represents like a tiny minuscule fraction of the systems that are out there in the world that run these things, and that's the low power tube amplifiers. And this is something truly amazing. And if you never heard low power tube amplifiers in a system that is built for them, and do not just think about speaker and amplifier matching, that okay, I get speaker X, let's say something that is really current hungry and requires like thousands of watts of power, and let's call that speaker the best of all speakers, and everything is just crap because they do not take as much current as they do. And now you are looking for an amplifier to match that. Of course, a low power tube amplifier will not be able to get any bass or dynamics from that monstrosity. I just call it monstrosity because it does not represent the majority of speakers. It's like having your speakers technology and just distorting it, just taking a direction which is really an extreme left, and you just turn a really sharp fork at the road, and you make that type of loudspeaker inaccessible for the majority of amplifiers. And the ones that suffer the most are the low power tube amplifiers. So they even had problem with the majority of loudspeakers in the market 20 years ago. And right now the market is even worse, but there are also really good signs. There are lots of companies like Devor Fidelity and a couple others who are making more and more sensitive speakers. So with those types of speakers, they are getting more and more in line and give more higher availability to low power tubes. Or like I heard about Tecton, they are also making high sensitivity speakers. So those give a chance for these amplifiers. Or look at Klipsch. Klipsch speakers are also perfect choice for that. But if you think of low sensitivity, low efficiency speakers, you can get okay results out of it. So when I first heard low power tube amps, I heard them with low sensitivity speakers, and even with those, I would say, like, this is saying it in a really dumbed down way, but to me they did beat the cream of the cream solid state amps of that time. Not in a sheer amount of bass or volume, no. They were far below that. But in musicality, like, try to play violin on it, try to listen to a human voice, and even with low sensitivity speaker, a low power tube amplifier, it is just classes and classes ahead of anything solid state. So if that's your prime motivation for listening to music, that you are into classical music, you want to listen to violin or piano, and you want to in piano, actually it's a really dynamic instrument. So if you are there to want to feel that huge body of the piano, of course the low power amp with a low sensitivity speaker will not give you the feeling of that body of the piano, but it will give you the tonality of the piano, that the piano starts to talk to you. It engages you into the piece of music you are listening to it. And when you listen to a solid state amplifier that can deliver 10,000 watts, then you will hear the sound of the piano, but not the music. So that was my introduction to low power tubes, and then I heard them, or at least one of them, with my speaker, which was a high sensitivity speaker, and that was just totally mind-blowing. Because for that gave the body of the piano, it gave the impact, dynamics, and everything. And but I have to warn all of you that these low power tubes amp I heard, they were not purchased from any store. They were all of them built by people, built by my audio buddies, my audio friends, and all of us started out just like any of you, finding maybe a hi-fi magazine first, or wandering into a hi-fi store, and then somehow all of us ended up just building our own amplifiers. And many of us started just with cloning something that we read online, that a DIYer built something, and we just followed the instructions and built it. But then I ended up going that way, that I started more and more getting into it, and finally I got to do my own designs and build my own circuits, and so on and so on. And at that point, when you are at the beginning of this journey, you already have a glimpse of what low power tubes can do for you. But of course, if you make such an amplifier and you compare it to something that's like a state-of-the-art product, for us this happened with the Yamamoto tube amp using the 45 tubes. So when we compared our darling amps with the Yamamoto, of course the Yamamoto bettered it, and by quite a big margin. But the Yamamoto used like the highest quality parts, and our amp used like really budget parts that, for example, the output transformer we used was the Hammond 125 ESE. That's not even considered audiophile by any standards. And even with that low quality output transformers, our darling amps were just in sheer musicality. I was really hard pressed to find anything commercial that can stand up against it. Of course, when you look at more expensive amplifiers in the commercial range, yes, they do stand up. But then we are talking about a David and Goliath situation. But I can tell you, and this is the wake-up call, that your tiny DIY David amplifier can play in the court of the Goliath. So do not worry about that. But so I want to introduce this concept to everyone's minds, that there are more cakes in the world of audio than what the reviews hint at. And when you think about what is the buzz in the audio community, in the 1990s, the huge buzzword was the single-ended triode amplifiers. And then you can recall that the Ongaku was brought at in this time, and that time it was unquestionably by far the best sounding amplifier of the era. And in year 2000, that's when the low power single-ended triode revival started, which was actually fed by the popularity of Ongaku. And there were a few builders, few guys who were not audio engineers, but who were like had other professions, and then they just came up with some ideas and built them. And just as a curiosity, how far can we go by bringing the power level lower and lower? And that gave rise to a whole subculture in US and in Japan of a large number of builders who built amplifiers with lower than 2 watt output power. So for the low power set world, like 4 watt is already too high. So if you think you are thinking that 20 watts is low power already, your calibration is off. Low power single-handed is really like low, and I'm talking about flea power. Maybe that's a better description of it. But in this world, we went down to less than a watt. I've been running for a long time. My main amp was putting out something between a third of a watt to half of a watt. And I would not change its sound for anything in the world. And then that's another thing, is that every amplifier is an expression of the dreams of its creator. And during those 20 years that I've learning about audio, I finally built something that matches my dreams, what I want to hear, how I perceive sound, how I can absorb music the best. And when you are in control of that process, if you buy anything commercial and swap it in, it will not match with your world. Yes, it will have probably excellent qualities. Some of the qualities will be better than what your amplifier does or has, but it will have other qualities which are your priorities, which are not in that $1 million equipment. And that brings me to today, to 2010, and now we have the obscenely high priced amplifiers, mainly solid state amplifiers, which dominate the focus of attention, and that's what people are most interested and most curious about. And I would say that it's okay to have a look at them. It's okay to get inspiration from them, but do not think even for a second that that's the only choice and that's the end of the road. There are many other roads which will give you much higher satisfaction than these that special segment of audio. So sound quality is not limited to the Titanic syndrome, so you do not have to overdo things to be satisfied. If you overdo things, just like as the Titanic story tells us, there's you might sink your ship easier than by doing something which is within the bounds of your creativity, the bounds of what you feel comfortable handling, and what works really well. When you look at these $1 million stuff, those are really specialized to certain situations, and then certain flavors and tastes, and it's more about a status symbol than music. And also today's hyped systems, they go for viewing sound as an object, or sound as something that has to be super catchy and showy. So if you go for a Titanic amplifier, then you will get a really showy, really gimmicky, very artificial sound. And if you want to get natural sound, that's not the way to do it. So Do not dismiss low power amplifiers, and I'm going to show you a few more videos on exactly why they work, what's the physics behind it, what's the technology behind it, because so far what I told you were my subjective experiences, but I will give you the objective part of the story, the electronics, the gist behind it, so that you know what is exactly happening, and when you are getting something, what is exactly that you get. So thank you for checking in. I hope you learned a lot. Like and subscribe so others can learn. Thank you. Bye bye.